may I apologize to you for taking you by surprise before we went for the break, to asking you whether it was at a convenient time. And may I apologize to everybody for having not mentioned the times for sitting. When I first came here, I was told that a 30-minute break is an absolute minimum for purposes of delayed broadcast and for corrections by the stenographers. So the only way you could get that is to divide the time such that we sit for 1 hour, 15 minutes, then take a 30-minute break. So at least we'll not be taken by surprise. We're now going to up to 5:15 before the next break.
Thank you, Your Honour.
You're most welcome.
I shall try to keep an eye on the clock from here.
Thank you so much.
A little difficult to see, but I will try.
I'll be your eye.
Thank you, Your Honour. I'll have several reminders. Thank you. Your Honours, turning now to consider the individual counts on the indictment. Your Honour, count 1 on this indictment alleges murder, cruel treatment and torture in relation to 3 victims: Ivan Zaric, a Serb, Burim Beta, and Agron Berisha, 2 Roma Egyptian. Your Honours, witnesses will, in dealing with this count, will say that as part of the conflict, the armed conflict, around 19th of May 1998, Serbian forces attacked the village of Grabanica, and Your Honours will recall I mentioned this village will have some significance, and this is the first place in which it does, in the municipality of Klina. Your Honour, witnesses describe the nature of that attack. They say that there was 2 days of shelling, albeit less on the second day, followed by a full-scale ground attack. But despite that attack, and despite the armed conflict, those living in that area still had to try to survive, and the essentials of life had to carry on. Your Honours, at the time of the attack, around the 19th of May 1998, 3 young men, or boys, of the 3 victims, went from their village of Dorak, which is about 10 kilometers from Grabanica, to mill their corn to flour at the Grabanica mill. According to witnesses 31 and 66, the young men went together to mill their grain on a horse-drawn cart. One was Ivan Zaric, and the other 2 were the Roma that I mentioned. They came from a small community where Serb, Roma, and Catholic Albanians lived in harmony together. Normally, this journey would take a couple of hours, but these 3 young men, boys, never returned. Witness 80 describes seeing them that day at the mill in Grabanica. He says that there were 2 Albanian, who he calls children, aged between 16 and 17, on a cart that came to the mill. And the 3rd person remained outside on the horse. The 2 Albanian children, he says, were related and from the village of Donac. He said they were polite. And he describes seeing them being taken from the mill by 2 members of the KLA, Hazia Morina and Shakir Krasniki. And they were taken to a house in Grabanica, nearby, where those 2 men beat the boys with sticks. The 2 men then declared that they were taking them to Jablanica. A few days or so later, witness 80 describes seeing them again. This time, what he refers to as a prison in Jablanica. By this time, he himself had been detained and was working in the kitchen of that prison area, in a barracks or a type of headquarters. He locates that place on the left-hand side of the road from Jabal. Your Honours may recall that Jabal is to the south of Jablanica. And he says it was near a mosque and a cemetery and what he describes as an ambulance station. Your Honours, I'm going to show you now a series of photographs of the village of Jablanica and the location of where the prosecution says witnesses will identify the prison or barracks building, and some of the pictures of the buildings themselves. A number of these have already been shown to witnesses in the last trial and identified, particularly by Witness 3 and Witness 6, as the place where they were detained in Jablanica. Now, Your Honours, perhaps I can just take you through this small slideshow. My only friends have got copies of these as well. Well, the first slide is page 13 of your map bundle. This is an aerial photograph looking at the village of Jablanica. And you can see the main road running through Jablanica. And the view in this photograph is looking essentially from the direction of Catholic Glojan towards where Jabal would be. And if you follow the road starting in the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph and follow it down into the photograph, you see the mosque on the hill, and there's a little cemetery behind, and to the side you can just see some of the gravestones actually as you turn the bend in the road. And on the bend in the road you see a red brick building and some objects in front in the cemetery area there. Following round the road you can see it turning into the distance and a little group of red tile roofed buildings, and beyond those red tile roofed buildings is the facility at which the prosecution says these individuals were detained. I can turn you now to the next map photograph. This is an aerial view of the village, and if I then just turn you over straight away, because this document is in E-Court 03036, page 2. We've annotated the next slide just to try to orientate or help orientate around where we are. And this time you can see Catholic Glojan is to the north and Jabal to the south. And the place at which we say these individuals were detained is the building shown on the left-hand side of the road coming out from Jabal as you enter the village of Jablanica. Your Honours can see it there circled. Actually, if you imagine driving your way in on that road, as you come up and you come round the bend, where the wooded area is, that's the area at the point of the two meeting roads where the mosque is. You can imagine it looking at it from both directions, just to help orientate a little bit about the geography of this particular area. Turning the page, there's the first photograph of the building, and actually if you do a comparison, I don't know, maybe you can from the physical documents, you can see in 15 the shape of the building outlined, the one that's circled, and then you can sort of pick it up a little bit from this photograph at 16, E-Court page 2 in 03037. And you can see the road going into Jablanica. This is map page 16, photograph that's being shown. And a walled area, red tile building to the left. And if you look along the wall going into the photograph, you can see what appears to be a ruined sort of gate, which appears to have had a top on it at some point. If I can turn the page to the next slide, 03037, E-Court page 3, you'll see the gate, this time really coming from the direction of Catholic Glojan. And just in the top of the wall on the left-hand side of the photograph, you can see poking above it the red tiles of the previous building. Turning to the next slide, or the next page if you're looking at it in the book, this is in E-Court at 00357, and now we have a view from inside the compound. I'm sorry, I didn't see you stand up.
Your Honour, it's something I do not like to do is to interrupt a colleague in full flood, but there has been there's been a reasonable amount of correspondence between the parties as to how these photographs should be labelled. Up until now, they have been labelled in my submission properly and neutrally. photographs 18, pages 18, 23, 25 and 26 contain language that we consider to be inflammatory, which Mr. Rogers knows we consider to be inflammatory, and we have objected to him that we will not concede any such wording as prison or detention facility. Your Honour has already made mention of the fact that the more documents a court sees which contain potentially prejudicial language, the more worrying it is. I simply rise to say I would ask Your Honours to simply take a pen and delete the words prison or detention facility. These are matters that have not been proved and we submit will not be proved.
Mr. Rogers, do you have any response?
Your Honour, no, I thought that word had been removed. I have to say.
Microphone, Mr.
I thought it had been taken off. I must say I didn't notice that it had remained on there on that particular photograph. Although I think that photograph has been identified by one of the witnesses. Oh, just bears with me. I'll see if I can just check that. I may be wrong, but I'll just see if I can check that.
I'm sorry, Your Honour, what is at issue is not what has been identified by a witness, but what will be proved by a witness. And labelling documents in advance in this way is as much as putting a photograph of the accused in the bundle and saying, the guilty man. It's not the way it should be done in my submission.
That wasn't the intention. If my learned friend is unhappy, we can very easily delete the word prison. It's the prosecution says is the prison. It will be a matter for Your Honours to determine whether it is or is not.
That's what you allege.
Yes, I hope that Your Honours can deal with it in that way and neutralise anything that may be upsetting my own friend.
Sure.
So Your Honour,
whether you call it prison or not, we will find out from how it was used.
Indeed, Your Honours will determine what you think it was in due course. We say the building on the right-hand side of this photograph is the prison, and when I come a little bit later in my presentation, I'll show you some other photographs which have been identified by witnesses saying that that is the prison, and indeed witnesses for whom there has been a conviction. So perhaps we'll come to it when we come to it. But let me just orientate you a little bit around this photograph. You can now see, looking into it, first of all the gate coming on the left-hand side of the photograph. And then there's what appears to be a long building of some sort in front of the wall. The red-bricked, red-faced building, which appears to have a number of windows in it, and no roof at this time when this photograph was taken, which the prosecution says is some good while after the actual events themselves. Clearly, it's a ruin, and was not, we say, at the time. Then on the right-hand side of the photograph is the taller red tile roof building, red brick faced, appears to have no plaster on it, which we say is the prison, or was used as a prison. Turning the page, I'm happy to see that the neutral language is there, which I'd hope would be on all of them. This is in E-Court at 03037. And page 4, and that gives you another view of the building we say contained the prison. We say it has 4 rooms to it, 2 at the front, 1 behind the bush, and then others behind those 2 rooms. And if I can just draw your attention to the man in the picture, and see him kneeling down on the right-hand side of the building at the ground level, appear to be 2 black holes and a man kneeling. Your Honours, we say that's the basement cellar area underneath this building, which forms part of the witness's narrative. They say some were detained. And if I take you to the next photograph, we're now moving into where the man was kneeling, and you can see there the 2, I don't know what to describe them, windows or holes, whatever they may be, but 2 holes looking in to what appears to be a water-filled basement. If we take the next photograph...
How do we determine that It's a water field.
If we take the next photograph, Your Honour, 03052, E-Court page 1. This is a photograph of the basement and can see it is water-filled. That's not to say it was always water-filled, but in this photograph it is, and witnesses describe how at certain times of the year it filled with water. Not always, but sometimes. So having orientated you around the photographs, can I take you now to the descriptions of some of the witnesses of what happened? Witness 80, we say, describes the building shown in the photographs. He said it had, the prison building, said it had red tiles, the whole building had red tiles, was close to the road with a wall, and had double gates topped by a small roof, and had a yard. And he says, witness 80, that it was there, in that yard area, that he saw the 3 victims of count 1 again. This is now, he'd been detained there, to take you back to the narrative, and he says he saw the 3 again there. Although, he says, they were so badly beaten that he could hardly recognize them. He says that the building belonged, that place, the photographed place, belonged to a relative of Lahi Brahimai. He says that as you entered the yard, there is a building immediately on the left, which had red tiles at the time, and was a long covered building with only 1 floor. The wall close to the road, he says, was part of the building. And he says it was that area that was a kitchen or eating place. In addition to that building, he said, within the compound area, was another. And that other building, he says, was the prison. Journalists have seen the photographs showing what appeared to be 2 buildings. It was, he says, square-shaped with a roof which he described had 4 triangles. He said it had a floor and a cellar basement, with 4 rooms, 2 at the front and 2 at the back, with a corridor through the middle. He says it was built of red brick, unpainted and unplastered, so that you could see the mortar between the bricks. He says that he saw who he describes as children being taken from the basement cellar area of the prison building. He saw KLA soldiers taking them from the cellar, these being, the prosecution says, the victims. And he says that the big fry, he refers to, saw them being taken out as well. And Your Honours, we say that the big fry he refers to are the 3 accused. Ramesh Haradinaj, Idris Balai, who he says was known as Togeri, and Lahi Brahimai. He says he saw the 3 young men or boys being taken into the yard, and there the soldiers beat them while the 3 accused watched. One of the 2 boys spoke Albanian and was calling out to their mothers, Kuku Nana Yemi, and crying out for help to anyone that would help them, pleading. He says they were beaten with sticks, thought that their arms were broken as they were not in a proper shape and were not being held in their normal positions. He says they were battered, broken and abused. This is what the prosecution anticipates he will say. When I say he says, that's our understanding of the evidence he will give. And that he was, one of them was, as he described, peeing himself, wetting himself. All of this while the accused watch on. He said, as he refers, boys were tied to what he describes, we say, as some sort of tree or wooden pillar. They were brought out in front of the kitchen area, which he refers to as like an open mensa or a canteen. They were tied to those wooden pillars with wire, with their hands tied behind their backs. Their clothes were wet, as though they had been detained in the basement prison, and they were trembling. He describes Idris Balai and a man called Bandash beating them, torturing them, and that Mr. Haradinaj was seated in the kitchen area. Lahi Brahimai was standing, and he describes this way, that for him, Lahi Brahimai, this was funny. The description he gives. He goes on to say that Lahi Brahimai joined in the beating. He used everything, shoes, sticks, and he refers to the children. Again, he keeps saying children. It's just the way he describes them. He says they couldn't stop the children peeing. I'm not suggesting they were very young children, but that's his description. One was crying, "Mother, oh mother," in Albanian. He says that during the beating, Lahi Brahimai accused the boys of being sent by the Serb army. They were found to have 100 Deutschmarks in their pockets. And he says that in order to save themselves when they were beaten, they said, yes, the Serb soldiers gave them to us. But he, the witness, did not believe that was true. He didn't think they were the type of people that Serbs would be sending, as he put it, without a single day of education. The beating, he says, continued for about 20 minutes. He then saw Idris Balai take a large, sharp knife from a sheath hanging on his belt. Balai said, "I'm only here to kill people." He placed the knife on the ear of one of the three and sliced the ear off whole. The other two boys, he says, screamed. Immediately after that, the beating continued, and witness 80 heard Lahi Brahimai and Idris Balai Toga speak about giving them papers to Drenica. That expression, he says, meant that they would not be seen anymore, that they would be executed. And he said after the ear cutting, he couldn't watch anymore, went to the back of the building, the kitchen area, canteen, pretending to do something. In addition to witness 80, the prosecution says witness 81 will provide evidence corroborating the account of this witness and providing his own account of what he saw. Your Honours, we recognise that there are internal differences between the accounts of the witnesses and between their own accounts. And Your Honours, in due course, will need to assess the weight to attach to each of their evidence should they be heard. But they are central to this count, so I must open them. Your Honours, witness 81, broadly we say, corroborates the account of witness 80. Witness 81 was a member of the KLA, but he was not based in Jablanica. He had been, he says, sent to the prison and there had met Nazmi Brahimai and Lahi Brahimai, who he knew as Maxhub. He describes, he says, the prison being located on the road to Jabal, at the end of the road, out of the village of Jablanica, as you travel towards Jabal. And Your Honours, it clearly is. He describes the prison as being on one level with a roof and a basement, like an abandoned type house with no windows or doors and no paint or plaster on the outside of the walls. There were 4 rooms, he says, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear. And there was a basement, he says, that was partly filled with water. He says that in the basement were 7 prisoners, 3 young men, a Serb and 2 Roma, and 4 more elderly people, 2 men and 2 women. between, caution with elderly, between 40 and 60. He assumed the women, he says, were Serb because they were not wearing the typical shamia headscarf worn by Albanian women. He said the prisoners all looked as though they had been beaten and looked very thin. Later that same day, Witness 81 saw Lahi Brahimai and Ramush Haradinaj and Idris Balai. He had known Ramush Haradinaj since 1995 and had met him several times since March 1998. He describes the relationship between Ramush Haradinaj and Lahi Brahimai as one where Ramush Haradinaj referred to Lahi Brahimai as Daiko, meaning maternal uncle. He says the Brahimais were based in Jablanica and the Haradinajs in Glojan, but essentially they were all one big family. Sometime that morning when he had arrived at the prison, he was told to go outside by Lahi Brahimai. He saw the two Roma and the Serb victim being taken from the basement. We say that is who he saw. There were about 12 KLA soldiers outside, including the 3 accused. He describes the prisoners being sworn at, interrogated and beaten because they were considered to be Serb spies. He heard, he says, Ramush Haradinaj swearing at them and insulting them, saying things like, "Where are your Serbian forces? I shall kill you and fuck your Serbian mother." He says they were interrogated in Albanian, but mainly by Lahi Brahimaj, but also by the other 2 accused, Togeri and Ramush Haradinaj, about the whereabouts of Serb forces. Lahi Brahimaj and Idris Balai were swearing, but they were mainly beating them. Lahi Brahimaj, he says, used a baseball bat. Nazmi Brahimaj and Ramush Haradinaj also joined in the beating. Toga said, "This is how you treat the enemy." Haradinaj punched one of the Roma several times with his fist until the boy fell to the ground. And he explains that later, sometime later in 1998, Ramush Haradinaj told him that he, Ramush Haradinaj, hated Roma. The Roma boys were screaming in Albanian, "Please don't kill us, we are with you." Towards the end of the beating, he saw Idris Balai cut off the ear of the Serb boy with a knife. Lahi Brahimaj then hit the boy on the head with a baseball bat, causing one eye to bleed heavily. He says, Idris Balai grabbed the Serb boy by his hair on the back of his head and took out the bleeding eye with his knife. He then turned to the 2 Roma and stabbed them several times to the chest area. Witness 81, he says, heard Ramush Haradinaj and Idris Balai say to the soldiers present, "Take them to Drenica." This was, he says, an expression learnt in the KLA to mean liquidate or execute prisoners, in particular Serbs, but also Albanians and Roma considered collaborators. He says the reason the phrase was taught was to avoid prisoners panicking if they were to learn of their fate. Ramush Haradinaj then said to him, Witness 81, and others standing by, "Take them to Drenica, to Father Adam," a reference to Adam Jashari, a KLA commander killed in an attack by Serb forces and regarded as one of the KLA's first martyrs. Although Witness 81 was from a different command, he acted out of respect for Ramush Haradinaj. He took the prisoners he had come for out of the compound, together with the other local KLA members. They were taken to the ambulance station first, but they did not leave there alive. Their bodies were later dumped by local KLA. Your Honours, turning to count 2, and I can say, Your Honours, that the bodies of these 3 victims have not been recovered. Turning to count 2, this is a count relating to murder, cruel treatment and torture. And the victims of this count are Uka Rekshepi and Nezret Alia, 2 Roma or Egyptian men. Your Honours, witnesses 54, 78 and 79 provide evidence that on the 20th of May 1998, at around the same time as the events in count 1 and the Serb attack on Grabanica, 2 Ashkali Roman Egyptian civilians, Uk Rekshepi and Nezret Alia, who were related, were abducted while cycling on the road between Grabanica and Dolovo to feed their cattle. Their family has never seen them again. Although in 2003, Uk Rekshepi's clothing was later identified among artifacts being displayed by the ICRC for the purpose of identifying those missing from Kosovo. Witness 54 said that they were abducted by armed soldiers and taken away in a car. Prosecution says they were taken to Jablanica, where they were seen by witness Kabashi, a member of the KLA, prosecution says, based in Jablanica since 9 April 1998. He describes them as 2 men of Roma ethnicity who were related, father-in-law, he says, and son-in-law. He had seen them earlier that morning in Grabanica, being detained by KLA soldiers with others at a Serb house. He says they were being accused of being Serb collaborators. He says that at Jablanica their hands were tied behind their backs with wires. He saw them in the prison at Jablanica and they were being kept there for only 1 day. He spoke with Lahi Brahimai about the prisoners, and he describes Lahi Brahimai as the main commander of the KLA hierarchy in Jablanica, together with Alush Agushi. Lahi Brahimai told him they were being sent to Drenica, and he confirms, like both witnesses 80 and 81, that that meant they were to be executed. Prosecution says both these victims were murdered whilst in the custody of the KLA. The prison, Kabashi describes being in a house used as a barracks belonging to the relatives of Lahi Brahimai and located on the road to Jabal on the outskirts of Jablanica village, about 500 meters from Lahi Brahimai's own home. And he drew a sketch to show where the prison and barracks were located. Your Honours, that is the sketch Mr. Emerson's already referred to. But in our submission, it shows largely what is already clear from the photographs and from the aerial photographs and the witness evidence of others where the location of this place was. And Your Honours can see shown, I think, on the screen that the map that sketch map that he drew.
And I have to object for the same reasons as before. This is part of his witness statement. It's not right for the prosecution to seek to admit it at this stage.
It's part of his evidence that the prosecution expects he will give. He's here, and I hope that Your Honours can just look at it now and deal with it now.
The Chamber did make its remarks a little earlier before the break about tendering documents and exhibits without witnesses. And it's all very well to say you will show a sketch during trial.
I'll leave it.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honours, Kabashi explains that he had seen other prisoners detained there from when he first went in early April 1998. And 2 men, Afrim Marina and another, Idris, he didn't know his other name, being detained as spies. And Lahi Brahimai kicking one or other of them. In addition, he describes other beatings and torture for other individuals, in particular one Roma from Budislak village near Klina, who he describes being severely beaten and cut with a bayonet, and so badly injured that he died. As far as Kabashi himself could ascertain, his only crime was to have been carrying a camera while travelling from Budisalk to Kralan, the victim saying the camera was for his pictures of his marriage, but he was being beaten on suspicion of taking pictures of KLA positions. Turning to counts 3, 4 and 5, Your Honour, I intend to deal with these together because the evidence of the witnesses is so overlapping. To try to separate them out is very problematic, so I hope Your Honours will forgive me for taking them together. Again, they involve murder, cruel treatment and torture. Count 3, the victim is witness 6, a Catholic Kosovar Albanian. Count 4, the victims are Nenad Remishtar, a Serb traffic police officer, Bosnian man whose name is unknown, who worked for the Serb power company Elektrokosovo, and 3 Montenegrins whose names are also not known. And count 5, the victims are witness 3, Kosovar Albanian, a man called Pal Krasniki, a Catholic Kosovar Albanian, and Skendakuchi, a Kosovar Albanian. Your Honours, amongst the victims that Shevchet Kabashi mentioned was a man who he said had been abducted between Klina and Jakova. This man, he said, had a Mercedes car which was taken by the KLA commanders at Jablanica. Kabashi gives his first name and place of birth, which is the same as that of witness 6, and describes